Welcome to the Contagious Code Podcast, where we dive deep into code, learn practical skills, celebrate the beauty of engineering, and eliminate imposter syndrome. I'm Tejas Kumar, and I've been building on the web for over 20 years at places like Vercel, Spotify, Zeta, and more. Today, my guest is Kelly Vaughn, a serial entrepreneur and founder of the TapRoom and another company, who is today the director of engineering at Spot AI. In our discussion, we go through her current role and responsibilities as an engineering leader at Spot AI, but also talk about what it took to found a consultancy, the TapRoom, and run it until it closed. We talk through the journey of running it and then closing it. We talk through decisions of should we have maybe gone with venture capital or bootstrapping? And we talk through the transition, reinventing of oneself from being just a serial entrepreneur to now an employee and a director of engineering. Kelly is a therapist and also an engineer and also an engineering leader. In fact, the engineering leader. I consider Kelly one of the greatest engineering leaders of our generation. And so it was an absolute pleasure to sit down and talk to her and get her insights on what it takes to actually be an engineering leader of such caliber. We also touch on mechanisms by which you can learn and improve, specifically attention and effort that help you on your way through career development. And finally, we land the plane with advice for all entrepreneurs and founders across listening to this podcast. Now, I'd like to offer this to everybody at no cost because it's very separate to my day job. And the way we can do that is through sponsors and partners. So let's take a moment to acknowledge them right now. The Contagious Code podcast is sponsored by Code Crafters. Code Crafters teaches people how to code the way I do by having them pick a programming language, so Python or JavaScript or whatever, and then pick a tool like Redis or Docker or Git, and then re-implement that tool in the programming language of their choice from scratch. By doing so, they get better at the tool because they literally rebuild it, and the programming language from scratch because they re-implement the tool with it. And so they have a generous free tier. If you'd like to give it a try, go to tej.as/codecrafters. Again, that's tej.as/codecrafters. The link is in the show notes. The Contagious Code podcast is also partnered with React Africa and React Brussels. These two conferences are happening, and if you share this episode on social media with a timestamp pointing to your favorite moment and include the hashtag React Brussels or React Africa, then you will enter a raffle to win a free ticket to either of these conferences. We're giving away one per conference. Thanks for sticking around. Now for my discussion with Kelly Vaughn. Kelly Vaughn, welcome to the Contagious Code podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm so glad we're finally doing this.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this for so long. We were just chatting before I hit record, and I have to say I've followed you and looked up to you on social media for years, literal years, and so I'm so hyped for this discussion.
That means so much to me. Thank you.
I'm sure there's a ton of listeners who are well familiar with your work. I actually see more of you on LinkedIn leading the engineering thought train. But for those who maybe aren't as familiar with you and your work, could you do a little bit of an introduction to yourself, what you've been up to these days, and what you've been up to in the past, sort of a broad spectrum basis for a discussion?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I have a very interesting kind of journey. So hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Vaughn. I'm currently director of engineering at a video intelligence startup called Spot AI. I oversee what you can call our software engineering org. So I don't manage the intelligence team, and I don't manage the folks who are working at the edge and on the video pipeline, but I do manage everything else. Prior to joining Spot, I've been there for about two and a half years now. Before that, I was an entrepreneur. I have been in the Shopify space for 10 years now. And I ran a Shopify agency for about 7 years. I co-founded a venture-backed startup in the fintech space around gift cards. I tried running both of them at the same time. Surprised it did not work very well, and I got super burned out. Add in the pandemic with e-commerce business. So that is kind of like a mixed kind of version of my story. I have 3 degrees from the University of Georgia, go Dogs. One of which is probably the most interesting because I don't have a degree in computer science or anything like that. I've got a bachelor's in psychology and 2 master's degrees in public health and clinical social work. So I'm actually a trained therapist. I taught myself how to code when I was 11. So there's a very disjointed story that we can absolutely unpack.
Wow, that's a lot. I love it. So I'm smiling because I also learned how to code when I was 8, and also play in a lot of different fields. So I so appreciate this. The only difference is I have absolutely no academic background, so I feel
it's totally fine.
Awesome. So okay, so you ran an agency and then a VC-backed company. I really want to dive into that because I think there's a lot of people interested in which one and the trade-offs between them. But to start with, you mentioned that you're the director of engineering at Spot AI, and you described Spot AI as a video intelligence company. Yeah. What does that mean? It sounds very almost mystical, video intelligence.
It feels very mystical watching what our AI team actually does. Okay, so Spot AI, we're a B2B business, mostly focused in the kind of security and safety spaces. So what our customers do is they can bring any camera they have. We do sell our own cameras as well, or give them for free depending on the camera type. The cameras connect to an appliance that they keep on site, and that way they kind of maintain all ownership of their video footage. But we run models directly at the edge, so on the appliance itself, and then send the metadata to the cloud. Basically, what this allows us to do is detect, people, vehicles, any kind of movement. There are additional things that I'm not going to get into too much because we're building some really smart, really cool features and functionality right now that's currently in beta. But basically the idea of this is you can detect what you need, base the rules around what you need, and get very immediate actions about that. So that might be you get an alert when somebody's on site at 2 a.m. when they shouldn't be there. Or on the business efficiency side of things, let's say you're a car wash and a vehicle is sitting at the pay station for over a minute, means they might be kind of running into issues there. And so you can actually send a text to somebody on site to be like, hey, go out and help them. And you can think about the combination of these. Basically, you're looking at safety reasons, security reasons, business efficiency reasons. We're across 17 different verticals. So what that means is that our system's being used in so many different ways, which means as an engineer, it's a lot of fun to work on this kind of product, especially at the forefront of AI, which is absolutely ever evolving. When I started the company 2.5 years ago, we were introducing our people and vehicle detection, and we're so far beyond that. Like, we have a feature called AI Copilot that basically what it does is it pauses everything. Everyone has a Copilot, of course. We pause the video, scan it, and immediately label everything that's on that screen. And so you can create zones based on that information and immediately see how many people were in this particular area at this given time and compare that historically. The nice thing is it's all retroactive. So you create a new zone that you want to learn about, it's going to pull all of the metadata that has existed since you connected that camera.
Wow. Incredible. I get the name Spot now. It's kind of cool because it spots things in videos.
Exactly.
Can it work with any camera and any video? Meaning, so the question I'm asking here is there for me, for example, an API that I can use? So I just plug in my video and I go identify stuff.
It's not open in that regard. We do have an API, but it's definitely B2B first and foremost. We do support most cameras that connect to the appliance itself. So that allows us to be a little bit more camera agnostic. There are limitations, but the nice thing about that is basically we're moving the AI technology from a quote unquote smart camera to you can use a quote unquote dumb camera that has no purpose except for to record video footage. And then you can run all those models at the edge. Reason being, compute power is going to be substantially higher on an appliance than you'll ever get in a camera.
Yeah. Yeah. This is so interesting. I think of so many applications for this. Unfortunately, also 1984 style government surveillance comes to mind.
Of course, and that's well, I know we're going to be digging into some ethics around AI, and this is obviously a hot conversation when we're in video intelligence. So I have lots of thoughts on this.
Okay, so you mentioned. So I asked you, or rather, in the outline we have here, we talk about complex cloud infrastructure. And to facilitate this kind of running models at the edge and doing inference, it sounds pretty complex. And I understand that Spot does this all via API. Can we go into a little bit of detail there? What does it take to run a model at the edge specifically? So not in one centralized data center.
I would love to go into that, but I cannot. And not because I am not allowed to, but because I actually just cannot explain how it works. It's built by a different team. But what I will say is we are highly, highly dependent on these APIs. We have an API that obviously has to talk to the appliance to fetch the video footage. When a customer is viewing our dashboard, they're actually viewing footage that is streaming from the appliance itself. It's not coming directly from the camera. It's not uploaded to the cloud unless you save a specific clip for a purpose, like to share it with somebody else, to add it to a case for, a damage claim, for example. That VOD then gets uploaded to the cloud and you're able to keep that into perpetuity. But there's a limited amount of storage on the appliance itself. And so 30, 60, 90 days, whatever you're paying for, it cycles out and replaces with new footage. Now, when we think about complex cloud infrastructure, the reason why this is particularly unique is if I am trying to fetch a VOD via the public API that I have access to, obviously, I'm having to actually communicate with the appliance to fetch the segment and then stitch it all together and then provide you with an MP4 file. It goes through multiple layers. You see one API, we see, 8.
Yeah. I have some very maybe noob questions about this. You mentioned some terms. So VOD, I'm assuming, is video on demand, which is video.
Thank you. Yeah.
You mentioned appliance and camera. What's the distinction here? I mean, a camera is clear, and is an appliance the larger device that houses the camera, or what's the distinction here?
The appliance is, think about a computer. Like a desktop computer is the appliance that stays on site, and that houses the video footage. So we have a pipeline that connects your video or your camera to the appliance. So as the camera is streaming, it is fetching all that video footage and storing it on the appliance.
And the appliance is owned by Spot, and it's in Spot's data center. Ah, okay.
Yeah, it's all owned by Spot. Difference being that it's video footage that's stored on-prem. Or on premises, so customers always have access to their own video footage. It also reduces latency if you're trying to stream locally. So we won't actually go through the cloud and through APIs if you're actually on site viewing the Spot dashboard. We'll stream locally if you're already connected to your local network.
That's so great. Spot seems like quite a big deal. I mean, you mentioned 13 verticals. How big is the company?
We have about 125, 130 employees right now. We're a Series B startup, and we are. I'll just say our customer count doubled year over year last year. And we are very, very rapidly growing, which is a very exciting problem to have. Also on engineering, it's a little terrifying because that's when everything starts to break. But you know what? This is why we're here. This is why I'm running a extremely, extremely talented, capable team to tackle these problems as they arise and get ahead of them too.
This is really refreshing to hear, especially because we're pretty much bear market now, right? In terms of the economy and especially tech, there's a lot of layoffs and so on. So to hear that you've doubled customers, incredible. You mentioned also this rapid growth being terrifying. I have to imagine as director of engineering, this comes with quite a bit of complexity. And the reason I say that is I've been through companies also where we end up doubling quarter on quarter. And this is rarely a good thing. I think shareholders and valuators will say it looks good on paper. It's because it's a hockey stick growth. But the reality is when you're leading an engineering team, you don't know what kinds of character types are joining your company. And this can lead to maybe conflicts and tension. Could you speak to the dynamic of that in the face of such rapid growth?
Yeah, on the customer side of things, it really means that you can define all you want how your system should be used. They're always going to find a different way to use it. And they're going to test the limits of what you currently have built. With that also means as you continue to, grow your customer base, you move up market, you have larger customers using your product, they're going to test the limits of your performance. And that's when we really start to see things break down. Because, if we have a customer that has, say, 16 cameras at one location, they're going to have a blazing fast experience on the dashboard, no concerns whatsoever. They're just going to go about their day and not know a different thing. If we have a customer that has thousands of cameras across hundreds of locations that are heavily using our dashboard, they're going to find those limits that we currently have. And then we're going to have to rethink how we're approaching, loading content and the workflows you're working through and reducing the number of clicks it takes to actually do something. And so it's an interesting challenge that we're constantly facing on the rapid growth side.
Mm-hmm. Rapid customer growth, but I understand you're also, to keep up with the customer growth, you've got to hire.
We are
a bunch
growing
of
our
folks.
team a little bit.
Okay.
But we're not rapidly expanding our team right now, and that's why I started with like rapid customer growth and not focus so much on the team size. But yeah, I mean, as you continue to grow your team, this is something I'm actively doing right now. We have this, we were talking about this little document that we have with the questions. And for one of the ones around hiring, all I answered was it's, I mean, hiring's hard in this landscape. There are so many people who've been laid off, and there's a lot of really, really high level talent, like high caliber talent out there, all going after the same jobs. And as a result, it starts to get very difficult to conduct these interviews. It's hard to reduce the number of qualified candidates because you have so many qualified candidates. And then you also have to think about every time you're growing your team needs to interview all of these people. You have your specific interview cycle. When you're interviewing, it takes away from building time, and it also takes away additional time for context switching depending on when you're actually doing these interviews. And so, when I'm talking about hiring with my team, I'm like, hey, you want help with all these things that we need to do, you're going to have to dedicate time to actually interviewing as well. This is part of your job.
Yeah. It's just the part that nobody likes usually, especially like engineers, right? Because you want to build something. Okay, so this is where you are today. Video intelligence. We've talked about what that means. We've talked about the verticals. We talked about the scale. But what we do on the podcast is often I envision the guest's experience as like a graph data structure. There's a bunch of nodes, and we draw edges between them in the discussion. So
that is the nerdiest thing I've ever heard. I love it.
Yeah, that's where you are today. But let's draw an edge to before being the Shopify plus consultancy, the agency building for e-commerce applications. What if I understand correctly, that was the first tech thing you did? Is that accurate?
Okay, so we have to go way back in history now. So as I mentioned, I taught myself how to code when I was 11. I learned from a book called HTML Goodies. I learned because of Neopets. If anyone out there is familiar with the wonderful, wonderful world that is Neopets. I started freelancing when I was 14 years old. That was when I started actually making money from coding. I actually did not make money for my first freelance client. It actually was an online catalog. There was no e-commerce component to it, so you couldn't actually purchase online. Again, I'm not doing the math, a long time ago. But it's kind of funny that it went full circle and ended up being an e-commerce anyway. I got paid a t-shirt.
Hey, that's something.
That t-shirt was an extra large, and I was this tiny 13, 14-ish year old.
So it was really a blanket.
It was really a blanket. Actually, about 5 or 6 years ago, my dad found it while he was cleaning up his house, and it was missing a sleeve. It had been used as a dust rag, and he picks it up. He's like, "Oh wow, this is this shirt." And so he sent me a picture of it, and it is somewhere in this house. I don't remember where, but I have my first dollar somewhere.
Right. So you started consulting at 14, and so you got paid in t-shirts. When was there a job, or was this straight to then the Shopify Plus stores?
No, there was definitely a few steps in between. So I actually started getting paid money after that for coding, which was nice. All through high school, undergrad, grad school, I continued to freelance. I sold MySpace layouts in high school for I think they were like $15 each. It's really great.
Wow.
Good business as a high schooler. So as I said, I did not go to school for computer science. I told myself if I was ever, I have this pattern in my life where I say, I'm going to say that I'm never going to do something, and then I end up doing it at some point in my future. Just it's what happens. So I was like, I never want to go into coding for a career, because if I have to do it, I'm going to grow to hate it.
Right.
Joke's on me. Here I am.
Do you hate it?
So I don't hate it. I don't enjoy it so much anymore.
Yeah, same.
This is why I'm an engineering leader and not actually hands on the keyboard coding. My website is a free template from Astro.
Oh wow.
That's how creative I'm going to get. And so I actually transitioned from I was freelancing in undergrad. My first quote unquote real job, which is questionable. What is that? My actual first real job in software engineering in high school? Nope. In undergrad, I worked as a in this College of Education, building websites for the University of West Georgia, which is where I started, and I was paid like $15 an hour. And my claim to fame there was we had just been in the process of actually rebuilding the entire University of West Georgia website. At the time, I was just focused on the College of Education. I rebuilt our login modal for the university website, and I was like, so many people are going to touch this. This is the coolest thing.
Yeah.
Continued to freelance. I discovered Shopify in 2014. So again, it's been 10 years now. I graduated from grad school in December of 2014. And then in February of 2015, I started a fellowship at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. This is a unique role because they needed somebody who had their master's in public health who also knew how to code. Very weird combination, right?
Yeah, and there you are.
And yeah, so 2 weeks into this fellowship, they let me know that I was the only applicant. I'm like, great, real good vote of confidence. So I am making $45,000 a year in this fellowship. That's my stipend. That's the absolute maximum that I can make. I'm making more money freelancing part-time than I am just through this fellowship. Mm-hmm. So when my husband and I got married in September of 2015 and I could get on his health insurance, I left the fellowship program and went full-time on my own as a freelancer. Right. So in 2016, I was like, I never want to run an agency. Again, seeing a pattern here. MailChimp did a feature on me called A Freelance Success Story, and it was beautiful, and I still have it saved on my computer. And in this article, I'm talking about how I really love this hybrid model of working with other freelancers to complete projects instead of actually running my own agency. 1 month later, I was like, actually, I think I'm going to make more money if I rebrand as an agency. And so in 2017, I rebranded as a TapRoom. And then I gained the Shopify Plus status. And so this is 2017 through 2022 is when I was officially, quote unquote, the TapRoom as an agency.
Right. And this is where I first heard of you. I remember reading about the TapRoom, and I always had questions about what does it do. And then I heard that it's involved with Shopify. But you know what, Kelly? I'm somewhat ashamed to admit I've never used Shopify. So I have no idea. I have no idea. So I know they're public, and I know they're doing a lot of work. So I know the most I know about Shopify is about their work with Remix and Hydrogen and React Server components,
which
because
is
I come from
amazing that's what you know about it. I absolutely I kind of love that. Shopify is an e-commerce platform. It is very, very, very well known at this point. Obviously, they've since gone public, and everyone's using it, and it's fantastic. They have been in e-commerce for a very long time. The company actually started because Toby, the founder, wanted to build an online store and found that it was, all big startups have some sort of connection to solving some sort of personal problem. He built a snowboard store in Ruby on Rails, and that was kind of the start of Shopify.
Wow.
And since then, Shopify is used worldwide. They just did their Q2 earnings call, and I think they surpassed over $100 billion processed just in their point of sale alone.
Wow.
There are so many zeros at the end for actual dollars processed through the entire Shopify ecosystem that I genuinely don't remember what that number is at this point. But they're really well known for, if you're a small business, you're able to very quickly get up and running. They have a fantastic kind of drag and drop-ish builder where you can add your products, create custom pages and sell, like get up and running very, very quickly. They have really fantastic themes that you can use for free or pay for one, customize it however you want, and you're up and running. And so on the developer side of things, they recently acquired Remix about 3 years ago. I don't remember when. And that's when you learned about it as well, where some of our friends in the Remix community joined Shopify because of that.
Interesting. Silly question, but is it comparable to like Stripe is a platform for payments? And similar, like WordPress is a platform for content management. Is Shopify that, but for e-commerce stores?
I would say you could argue yes, but it's probably like an oversimplification of it. I think there's definitely like a crossover between like WordPress as a CMS and Shopify as an e-commerce platform for sure. Stripe gets a little bit more complicated.
Does Shopify also help small businesses? Sorry, these are Shopify. I should maybe just get Toby on the podcast. I probably will at some point. But like,
I'll
does Shopify help with also the logistics side of shipping like physical items?
Yeah. So,
wow.
Of course, I've been out of the space for a little while, and I know their acquisitions have come and gone, but long ago they started with being able to print labels and like purchase and print the labels directly from the system, and so you're able to have schedule that pickup. They've worked with 3PLs as well, third-party logistics, to actually warehouse things for larger businesses that are no longer selling outside of their house. I think one of the coolest things about Shopify is their partner ecosystem. And that's what really drew me into it in the first place. And the reason why this is so cool is because while they're continuing to invest in the platform, like the core platform that anybody can use, they've created this ecosystem to allow any other company or individual to come in, build an application, and sell that in their marketplace. And they have so much money that they're generating for partners because of that. They have a fantastic referral program. Again, I've been listed as a Shopify partner since I think 2015, and Shopify Plus partner since 2017. And because of that, you get referral. It's like this is passive income. This is actual passive income because the work has been done.
Wow.
And you get paid 20% of their base plan that they're on with Shopify, as long as they're actually still paying for Shopify.
Oh wow.
So when you're talking passive income, that is, one really cool thing as well is, I assume they're still doing this, the first $1 million you make in a calendar year, you don't have any kind of fees taken out of that. After you pass the first $1 million, then you have fees taken out.
Wow. Okay,
$1 million.
Yeah, without any like strings, so to speak, right? No fees. That's incredible.
Exactly.
And so the TapRoom is this agency that helps small businesses build sites on Shopify. Okay.
So we started with we were very much in like the SMB space, the mid-market space as well, where we built the online store experience. Now we could set up a theme and move some things around and say, all right, here you go. But where really people came to us is because they needed custom help. They might have a very custom bundling solution that they want to release. They might have a full custom third-party system that they need to integrate with their APIs to like have the two communicate. They might have custom discounting involved that needs to actually appear at checkout. So like all of these various things. So we would build more custom themes than like using a theme from the theme store at the time. And then we'd also build these custom applications. Actually, the venture-backed startup I had started originated from a custom app that I had built for another customer.
As always, that's even how Shopify began. Interesting. Okay, so you built a lot of custom stuff. Was there much overlap between these custom things that you could build like open source bases and then have the... Interesting.
Yeah, because at some point, there's only so many ways you can set up an online store. They all contain the same kind of components. You have your homepage, you have your collections page, you have your product listing page, you have your cart, you have your checkout. You have some additional informational pages. So basically what I ended up doing over time is like, I'm just going to grab some of these components and save them, thinking like a storybook type environment. And then I can just grab and, embed it right in there. It speeds up the development time for me. or anybody else on my team. I think at its peak, I had about 25 people working at the TapRoom. So we had plenty of people to kind of help speed up that process.
This is so interesting because I feel like this is the same like 11-year-old learning to code situation where you just like get used to the idea that, okay, we can't be doing the same task 8 times.
Yep.
We need abstraction. I think this really does come from having your like nervous system evolve or like wrap around a computer from a very young age.
Absolutely.
We had Kent Dodds on the podcast. Same thing. Like he's also been coding for a long time, and he tends to find things that you can automate and then automate them. You said you've ran the TapRoom for a long time. I think it was 10 years.
About 7 years total. Yeah.
What did the work you did? How similar did it look at the beginning versus the end?
It's so, like you look back on some of the code that you wrote and you're like, oh, you sweet summer child, like you knew nothing. I mean, there's a lot of similarities that you continue to use even 7 years ago, even 10 years ago. The Shopify language they use is called Liquid. It is a Ruby-based templating language that is used by other systems as well. And so a lot of that has stayed the same over time. So how you actually grab those various variables never really changed. Now they evolved over time, of course, and you're able to grab more, you're able to do more with it, more complex logic and so on. But that base is all the same. Now, one really interesting thing about building a Shopify theme, especially if you're building it in within their kind of theme builder, or you might be building a custom theme like through they only recently introduced like their GitHub connection, by the way. Like it's evolved a lot over time just from a developer experience perspective. But a lot of themes still use jQuery.
Wow.
And that is a painful thing to go back and be like, oh, wait, do I need to upgrade my jQuery version? It's just like little things like that where you're like, oh. So, it doesn't really support a lot of the modern, like building a regular Shopify theme does not really support the kind of modern development practices we often do today. That is, part of the reason why they acquired Remix has really allowed them to expand beyond building within like the framework that is a Shopify theme and start to introduce the concept of a headless commerce store where you can do whatever you want. You can use whatever languages you want. You can build however you feel is, most useful. You can also incorporate more disparate systems into the Shopify store, grabbing membership data from a different customer record management system, or relationship management system, like anything like that. And that's what really allows you to expand on that. But like within the Shopify, that kind of theme space is JavaScript, like plain old vanilla JavaScript, CSS, and HTML.
Wow. And of course, jQuery. You mentioned running this agency. You had 25 people working for you. I'd love to talk a little bit about what it takes to do that, because I understand. Yeah. And so I used to have an agency myself just for 1 year. And 1 year in Europe and Germany was absolute hard mode. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. I want to maybe compare notes a little bit, because as you run an agency, you've got to wear so many hats, right? You've got to wear the tax hat, the finance hat, the hiring hat, the coder hat. What was your experience like? Let's maybe start by talking about the finance side. Were you like prepared for things like taxing and payroll? Was this outsourced? Like, what was the model there?
Oh yeah, even before I started the agency, when I started freelancing a little bit more seriously, I immediately got an accountant. I understand finance. I understand what it takes to balance, a book. I do not want to do it myself.
Yeah.
And, when your role is CEO, and by CEO, I mean Chief Everything Officer, you very quickly learn you don't want to do everything yourself. And when it comes to taxes and finances, that is absolutely something you should outsource. So yeah, I definitely use a CPA for that.
Good. Yeah, I did the same. The only problem is they didn't speak English, and I didn't speak very good German. So it was so
that makes
difficult.
it a little difficult.
Yeah, one quarter they were like, hey, you owe 27,000 euros in taxes. And I was like, why? We didn't even earn that much. And they were like, oh, sorry, this was a different client. This actually happened.
I would fire them so fast. Please tell me you didn't continue to work with them.
There's no one else to go to, because the others don't even speak like basic English. Like Germany is it's really, when I say it's hard mode, it was, I had to stick with them and just sort of forgive the mistake. But the same mistake happened a bunch of times.
Oh no.
What was
I
your
hate that for you.
experience? I know. I'm so happy I stopped that. What was your experience with hiring? And here I can maybe share.
Yeah.
So my experience, it was actually not difficult because I've got a ton of friends in the space, and I was like, "Do you want to come? Do you want to come?" And a lot of people did. However, some folks I had never worked with before, but I did have just sort of discussions, interactions. So I thought we could just skip the interviews, and we decided to just do contracts for a few projects. And I was surprised at the lack of experience, frankly. Like I didn't know that I'd need to sort of micromanage as much as I needed to, but like there was, for some reason, like things just weren't being done to the degree of I'd say quality that my clients expected. And newsletters, this happened one time. So, someone who worked for me sent out a newsletter on behalf of a client that contained a code error, just because they decided, this doesn't need to be reviewed. I could just like MailChimp this to everybody. And so I'm curious if you had a similar experience, or maybe this was just me.
No. This is very common. Now, I definitely recommend doing interviews. But one thing I will speak to, and of course, this is a little bit more US centric to a degree, but I did have an international team as well. There is a difference between hiring a full-time employee and hiring a contractor. Legally, there are differences in how you can work with contractors. You can't tell them how to do the work. You can only tell them what needs to be done. Those kinds of nuances really do make a difference. And the other thing that you'll notice is when you have full-time employees, they're going to be much more bought into the mission of what you're building than a contractor will. Because that contractor might be working with several other businesses because they're, basically freelancing. And so that you get a different level of buy-in and a different level of care because of that. Now, hiring internationally as a full-time employee, there are tools out there like Deal and remote.com that do help facilitate this, but the fact of the matter is it is very difficult to hire full-time internationally. I just last year for Spot, I opened up an office in Poland. So I went through this exact process to say, I have full-time employees out in Poland. I also have contractors out in Poland, and I know exactly the difference. You have to learn so much about labor laws, and there's the nuances between an employee in this country versus an employee in this country, and how you need to make the decision is it worth the effort to actually hire there? And that is why you also see a lot of companies say, no, we're just hiring in the US. So that's one of the biggest findings. I think one of the things that took me by surprise the most, and it was a learning curve for me to start to hire people onto my team full time, because it's terrifying. Their living, their budget, their ability to pay for their family, their house, their food, all their bills is now dependent on my company succeeding. And that is very scary. And actually, that was one of the reasons that led to me shutting down the agency in 2022, was because it got to the point where I had to take out so much in loans and debt to cover payroll before I shut things down that it was a difficult conversation, because I could not afford severance. There was no severance because I had no money. I had almost $200,000 in debt from the TapRoom by the time I shut it down. Thankfully, It is all paid off. I don't have to think about it anymore, which that was my goal, pay it off by the end of December last year, and I did do that, so I'm very happy about that. But it is it's very difficult also because, that ruined relationships. Like the folks that I worked with, I was close with them. Obviously, they reported to me, and, I am their manager. I do run the company, but it ruined every single relationship I had of everyone who worked for me, except for my mother-in-law. She still loves me.
Your mother-in-law worked for you?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
She still does. She still does work for me. Yeah, that was actually one of my favorite parts of this whole thing is I got her involved in kind of like data migration. So migrating from one e-commerce platform to another. She became very, very familiar with the way that Shopify CSVs are formatted, and the process of integrating all the information in there and testing and so on, to the point where while I no longer run an agency, she is now working with 3 or 4 other agencies doing this same migration work.
That is so cool.
It's so fun.
You've given her a skill for life. That is so cool. I've always been scared of family members on payroll for the reasons you mentioned. Like it has the potential to like really sour some relationships, unfortunately. But hey, that's awesome. That's so great that your mother-in-law is thriving because of this one experience.
Yeah.
You mentioned debt to run the tap room. Was there ever a consideration? I have to believe there was, right? A consideration for raising like venture capital. You mentioned you had this gift card business for the consultancy. Was that an option?
I never considered it. No, I feel like raising venture capital for a service-based business is very challenging. What I should have really considered doing is selling the agency a year earlier than I actually did. Because here's the thing. If I were to go back, and I don't like dwelling on this for this particular reason, if I were to have listed the agency for sale a year before I actually did, I probably would have sold the agency for 7 figures.
Oh,
Instead,
wow.
I shut it down.
Right.
So,
and those 7 figures would have helped pay off the debt and everything.
There wouldn't have been debt. Exactly.
Yeah.
But I am a firm believer in I took the steps that I took to lead me to where I am today. And I'm thriving in where I am today. I had to rebuild myself. I had been at my absolute lowest ever personally when I shut down the agency and left the startup that I had co-founded. And I had to completely redefine who I was because I was always Kelly the entrepreneur. That is who I am as my identity. And I had to refine myself. I had to rediscover myself. So it was a really, really dark time in my life.
Yeah. I'd like to discuss that because I also like shut down this consultancy and joined DataStax. But I think it's interesting you mentioned that, and I want to just echo what you said, right? Like that the way you closed this agency was important. It sucked, but it was important to lead you to where you are today. I was on a live stream yesterday with the DevRel community of Africa, and they asked me like, what's the most important thing to be good at, DevRel or engineering? And I said, I think it's not just applicable to DevRel or engineering, but I think in this case, even to things like transitioning from being an entrepreneur to director of engineering, I really think the basis for thriving, and I would really want to get your thoughts on this, is the basis for thriving is attention, effort, and mistakes. Like for me, this trinity is like super important. Like you pay attention to something you want to maybe be good at or grow, and you put in effort, and along the way you'll make things that you only find out are mistakes later. But these mistakes are super important because then you can reflect and actually, as you mentioned, reinvent yourself. Go from being previously the entrepreneur to something different. What do you think of that? Do you think that there's something there?
No, absolutely. I completely agree. As humans, we learn more from our failures than our successes. This has always been a trait we all have innately, in that failure sucks. It hurts. Whether it's rejection, whether it is you messed up and you now need to pick yourself back up again, or it could just be something very, very small. I mean, it sucks every time. But that is where that's where we find the most growth internally. And the harder it becomes a lot more difficult the more public you are, which I think you can also very much relate to this, where everyone's watching what you do and everyone has this idea of who you are. They have defined who you are in their minds, and you need to break that association while you're also trying to break that association within yourself. And that's a very, very challenging thing to do. I completely agree. I think the effort you put into something, the understanding where you want to be, but also allowing yourself to pivot. And that is, it's related to mistakes. It absolutely is related to mistakes, but not always. There are definitely cases where you might say, hey, I just don't enjoy doing this anymore. And it's difficult to accept that kind of thing as like, okay, well, I now need to make a change. We all know change is difficult, but being able to say out loud, I don't enjoy this anymore. I don't love this anymore. I think I need something different, is a very important statement, a very powerful statement you just made. But now you have to do something about it. And that's the last thing. That is where the effort really comes in.
Yeah. And I like that you highlight that it sucks. And people, this thing you mentioned, this trap of people around you casting you into a type, I've felt this so many times across my life, and it's not necessarily because I'm public. I'm really not that public. I think just even in private settings, there've been times where I've, growing up, I've changed character because like I just didn't like being this person who laughs at these jokes and makes these statements. And
100%.
There were times where I've been in groups and people are making really stupid jokes that I used to laugh at, but I was like, actually, these are not helping anyone. And so there were times where literally I was like, that's not funny. And then all the guys were like, what do you mean? Stop being such a, whatever.
Yep.
And I lost friends in this process because they had cast me into being that type. So I love that you highlight that. Like when something doesn't serve you anymore and you want to change it, you may lose people, but it's worth it because the right ones will stick around. I think that is so valuable.
I think it's very important to remember that there are people in your life at the right stages in your life. And there's going to be a time when if you are changing as a person, you cannot expect everybody to change with you. And it's the same as if you're at a company that's growing. If a company is growing, its culture is going to change over time. And if you are no longer craving where that culture is now, let's say they're now in that 1,000 to 10,000 kind of range, and you really enjoy that 0 to 10 to 100 space where it's just rapid growth chaos, you might not be suitable for that organization anymore. Like you don't want that anymore. And that's what I was really talking about. Like, is this something I really want? So, this applies in personal life. This applies in your professional life, 100%.
This is so cool. And in fact, this is actually why I didn't last very long at Spotify. For those who maybe don't know, I stayed at Spotify 7 months. And it's because of this. Like I spent my entire life before, kind of like you were saying, you were Kelly, the entrepreneur up until this point, right? Mm-hmm. And for me, I've always been in early stage startups between seed and Series B, somewhere there. It was a bunch of German startups and then Zeit, which is now Vercel, and then G2I, like all of these very early stage things. And then from that, literally the job after G2I was at Spotify, which is like 4,500 people.
That's
publicly
a culture
listed.
shock.
It is a culture shock. And I was not ready for this at all, where things move very slowly, very, very slowly. It took us 3 months to decide on a cloud database to use with failover and so on. And I was not used to this. I was like, pick one and go, And so I remember speaking with my manager and I said, I feel like I'm doing nothing here. And why is it that we move so slowly? And my manager, one of the greatest people I've ever worked with, said, hey, look, man, we're being watched like hawks by Deezer and Apple Music and Tidal and Amazon Prime. And if we make one mistake, it's a highly competitive space. We can't afford to make mistakes and have downtime. So we have to move slowly and we have to be cautious. And that's just a consequence of where we are. And it was at this time I realized, this is not my speed at all. And then I had to leave. Yeah.
And it's the exact opposite for my husband. He actually left a very large company he was working for, parent company in the New York Stock Exchange. So like very large company, and joined my startup with me. And we worked fantastically together, by the way. Like we now know, like, if we need to work together, we can work together, but we're going to try to not, because it's nice to have things to talk about when we're not just talking about work all day in the same company. But he was very much the same. He was like, okay, wow, early stage startup, not for me. Like he did not enjoy it. And now he's at a larger organization again and he's thriving.
That's awesome. That is so good. Okay, so you shut down this business. As you were talking about having these people reliant on that income that you as the business owner have to supply, I get flashbacks to a conversation I had with a friend of mine, Ashley Williams, founder of Axo.dev. Same thing. I was considering starting a VC-backed company and having like a team and so on at a time. Actually, before my current job, I was thinking about what's next. I applied to YC, and like I was like, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to start a AI company. But Ashley was like, do it maybe. But she took a lot of time to explain to me the pressure of paying everyone's salary and making sure that like you can do it reliably, making sure that you can offer equity, making sure that in the event of a layoff you can offer severance. And Ashley was like, honestly, like I spend most of my time dreading or thinking about that. And this was a big deterrent for me. So when you mentioned this, it becomes all the more real that's a reality that a lot of founders have to deal with.
Yeah. We we did the same thing when we raised a very small pre-seed round. But it was in 2021. And so it was peak fundraising time for venture-backed companies. They're like, oh, you breathe? Here's $1 million. And it was a great time to be a startup founder. So, you know, we raised, I think it was like $1.2 million in 3 weeks, which was absolutely absurd to like reflect back on that. And
this
when
is
you've
for,
never seen, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. This is for your gift card business?
Yes.
Oh, cool.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you see 7 figures in your bank account, you're like, whoa, I've never seen that number before unless I like Photoshop it. And so that was pretty cool to see. But there's so much responsibility that comes with that. And that was at a time when the idea was grow, grow, grow. Like, we just need to like get more people in there. And if you have more people in there, you're going to be able to sell more. And if you sell more, you're going to be able to hire more people. And like the cycle continues. What actually ended up happening was the exact opposite. The tone within the venture space started changing from growth at all costs to efficiency. And that meant that you have to do layoffs. Like, that is what really sparked all these layoffs in the first place, is all these companies got massive, massive amounts of cash flow, like inflow from venture-backed startups for whatever reason, grants that existed also like around pandemic time. And then they had to backtrack, being like, oh, wow, we grew far too fast. And now our expenses are too high. That's how I ended up with $200,000 in debt with a TapRoom. And that was totally bootstrapped. So what I would say, if you're considering going the bootstrap route or the venture-backed route, if you can start bootstrapped, that's what I would recommend doing personally, because it's going to teach you so much more about running a business and understanding like what you want out of a business before you're starting to now be responsible for a board and working with, you know, you can still have advisors even with a bootstrapped company. You know, you don't have to go the venture route. It is one avenue you can go down, and you can learn so much from your partners that you're raising money from. Like, absolutely massively, massively helpful. You know, I was with that company. I took a 1-month sabbatical for the month of May in 2021, and that's when I co-founded this startup. We launched in October. We closed our round of fundraising in September. We launched in October. I left in March. So I was not there for very long. But it was enough time for me to say, this isn't for me. As we were just talking about. That's when I realized like the venture, like the VC-backed life at that stage of my life, especially dealing with the TapRoom as well, was not for me. And that's what ultimately led to me leaving.
Interesting. If the TapRoom wasn't in the picture, do you think you would have continued with that?
I think I don't know. I think there were a lot of mistakes that were made along the way. There are a lot of things I would change, and I'm afraid that if the TapRoom wasn't in the picture, I wouldn't have gone down the same path I would have gone down anyway. And so it's really hard to say, because again, a TapRoom client is what sparked the idea of building this company in the first place. And so it's all so intertwined. I cannot picture not having that.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about breaking away from Kelly the entrepreneur, and moving to Spot. There's a maybe misconception with listeners who think that when you're somewhat public, you don't have to look for jobs. You just get DMs from people and you join a company. Can we talk a little bit about how you joined Spot, and maybe extract from that ways people can try and find work in this bear market?
Yeah. What I'm going to say is, regardless of my path, relationships are everything, especially in this job market. It is your network. It is your friends of friends. It is random colleagues you may have worked with in the past, or somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. You know, your network and your relationships that you build are everything. I'll tell you exactly how I got the job at Spot, and it is not something that a lot of people can repeat. And so I will preface it with that. When I was starting to consider leaving my venture-backed startup and winding down the TapRoom, I was talking to my husband about it because I make a lot of big decisions while we're on a road trip, and we were on a road trip through North Carolina. So it was time. I just kind of broke down. I was just like, I am at such a low place in my life now that I need to figure something else out. And I don't really know where to begin. My husband reached out to the recruiter he used to work with at the former company that he had left to join my startup. And he was like, hey, I think I'm going to go back on the job market and look for something. Let's catch up. By the way, my wife is also likely going to be looking as well. And at this time, remember, I went from graduating from grad school to joining the CDC to freelancing and running my own company this entire time. I did not have a resume. Like, I had never interviewed for a job in my life at this point.
Wow.
So this is a very weird time for me. And so he ended up saying, all right, give me her resume. And I'm like, cool, let me figure out how to do that. And I put together a resume, and he connected me with one of the recruiters at their firm and was like, hey, I actually have this really cool opportunity for you. I know you're looking for something more at like the director level. This is billed as an engineering manager role, but I think it's a cool opportunity and it's worth a conversation. So she schedules the call with the hiring manager for this. And I see the name pop up on my calendar, and I'm like, we follow each other on Twitter. Okay, this is awkward. And so at this point, I had not said a word about shutting down the agency or leaving the startup. And so I DM'd him, and I was like, hey, just a heads up, don't say anything. Like, none of this is public yet. And he's like, honestly, I was surprised to see your name come across, but yeah, I'm looking forward to chatting. He helped me through the entire interview process. And I to this day, I think the whole reason why I got this job at Spot is because of him. Is because of the coaching he provided and the mentorship he provided, knowing that I was coming from such a different background. Being an entrepreneur, that I'd never gone through this interview process before. He coached me through the entire thing. And I'm eternally grateful for that. And so to this day, when I'm looking at resumes, when I'm, considering hiring, there's this little special something that I see in people's resumes that are just unconventional, like mine. And I'm like, okay, they're going to bring a very different viewpoint than, say, everybody who went through a CS program at the same school, and now they work for one of the FANG companies, and now they're looking to join a startup. It's the same story we've heard a lot. Coming from a non-traditional background, those who are transitioning into engineering later in life, they've worked 2, 3, 4 different kinds of careers in the past. They bring such interesting stories. And they bring such just an interesting level of curiosity. And you definitely see that in entrepreneurs as well.
That is a very non-repeatable, very unconventional story. And that it never occurred to me. We've been talking about your career history for a while, and I love sort of walking this timeline with you, but it never occurred to me that before Spot, you've never ever had a full-time job. You've never been through you didn't even have a resume.
Exactly. And so that's why I was saying, you could say the fellowship is my first real job, but let's be honest, Spot is my first real job. And I joined in 2022. That is my first real adult job.
Wow. That's absolutely bananas. You mentioned relationships are everything. I think that is so true. There's a book that I read that I think is required reading for the vast majority of listeners. I'm not sponsored. I have no relationship with this book at all, but it's called Plays Well with Others by Eric Barker. And it's a really great book. Have you heard about this book?
I actually have not read that one, so I'm going to add that to my list.
It's such a great... So the book is Eric Barker testing the various maxims we grow up with through science. So the maxims being never judge a book by its cover. And he goes well, should we? I mean, our prefrontal cortices are like prediction machines. They literally we base most of our lives around avoiding dangerous situations, aka judging dangerous situations by cover. So is it actually adaptive? So that's chapter 1, and he just continues to go through these maxims, for example, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, or be uniquely yourself. We're told both of these things. Anyway, without saying too much, at the end of the book, he explores the idea that no man or no person is an island, meaning community is everything. And he finds that a lot of the scientific literature today points to the fact that, yes, as you so astutely said, relationships are literally everything. And he looks even through the evolution of human history, how the Neanderthal species were bigger, stronger, smarter even. They had bigger brains than us. But the reason the Homo sapien race won was because we worked together. We can do that. Relationships are literally the basis of why we're the apex predator today. And so, I don't know, I think that's so cool. Like, it works professionally, but also just in everything. I had almost the same experience, although I did have a resume before, but I had the same experience with my role at DataStax. I was also running a consultancy. Europe beat it out of me. And so I was looking to shut it down. And my current manager at DataStax, they call managers coaches. So my coach, Carter, was working at DataStax, and he mentioned he was hiring. And so I applied, and he was like, I heard from the person, the recruiter doing the interview later. She was like, I was just reviewing these resumes with Carter in a big stack, and then he saw your name and he like freaked out. He was like, whoa, this stage? And then he was like, we have to get him. And this is because we met at a conference before, and he saw me speak, and he was like, and so he then messaged me, but as you mentioned, we follow each other on Twitter. And he was like, what happened, man? I thought you have a consultancy. And I was like, yeah, don't tell anyone. But it was exactly the same. I think that's a huge takeaway for people is I don't like the term network, like to network like a verb, because
it feels very transactional.
Exactly. And it brings with it like an intention that maybe isn't entirely pure. It's like network with an agenda,
Yeah.
But I think we're not talking about it this way. We just mean like make a lot of friends and then
be genuine about it. Again, it's not transactional. Relationships should not be transactional. There's a time where when you can cash in on that. Just yesterday, I had somebody reach out to me on LinkedIn and be like, hey, you're connected with this founder of this company. I'm really, really excited about this role. Can you recommend me? And this is like, this is one of my favorite parts of just like my network and being able to communicate with, these people and make these connections. Like, this is somebody I met the better part of a decade ago. And so I have been following this individual's journey for a very long time. And to have the opportunity to be like, hey, this person would be a fantastic fit for your team, and here's why. And like genuinely excited about that opportunity. I hope it pans out, but at least I know, this is exactly the kind of thing where I know now the founder is pulling this individual's resume because they did get a recommendation from somebody who they trust.
Yeah. Do you experience the opposite side of this though, where people are like trying to network with you with just that agenda and it's not 100%. Genuine? It's more like, how do you navigate that? That must be super difficult to navigate, especially if you want to be like a decent person with integrity.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get some very interesting messages from people, as you can probably imagine, especially whenever I announce that I'm hiring. Like I get some folks who are just like, hey, can you refer me for this job? I'm like, I'm the hiring manager. No, I cannot refer you for this job.
Refer you to myself? Like,
yes, exactly. I will tell, hey, self, this person who I don't know is absolutely perfect for this job. I brought on people in my network before to work at Spot. Again, it's just, the relationship side of things. But yeah, I mean, I consider myself somebody who gets a pretty good read on intentions relatively early on. And so, there's no easy answer to this question, because there's always going to be people who are trying to game the system or just trying to take advantage of you. And I accept it for what it is. I'm like, look, I don't know all their circumstances. I can't help them in this particular situation, or maybe I just don't want to help them in this particular situation because they said something that I was just like, I'm not okay with this, that they've just said in the past. I've gotten some really weird messages from people. Somebody called me out for not responding to their DM the other day publicly on a post that I had approximately 200 unread DMs because of this hiring post. And they're like, don't work with this time waster. And I'm like, great. Well, now I know where your resume is and I'm going to go ahead and reject it. Like, you've shown your true colors here. I don't know what else you want from me, but like, I understand, reaching out to people and DMing people. Don't take it personally if you don't hear back from them. Like, if you saw my inbox right now, you'd be like, how do you deal with this? I'm still asking myself that question.
Yeah, it's almost like a pre-screen. You get a preview of how they're going to behave in your team should you hire them.
Absolutely.
Like,
Absolutely.
you can already see the Slack message that hasn't got a response in a few hours, and these people going like, "Oh my god, yeah." It helps vet. Yeah, I find this really difficult to navigate also because like there's people I meet like one time who will immediately be like, "Hey, so can you like retweet my thing asking for a job?" Usually, I don't mind doing this honestly because if it helps someone, it helps someone. But the ask sometimes is very big for somebody I barely know, and I feel really bad for like not moving in those cases, but I just don't know enough, you know, and it's tricky. Yeah,
my line is typically, if you're looking for a job, I'm more than happy to retweet that you're looking for your next role. If you are asking me to promote your business or promote a fundraiser that you've provided me with absolutely no context as to why this is so important, I have a responsibility that comes with having such a large audience, as you do too. And, you know, I didn't take my decision for what I tweeted last week about a particular company very lightly. When I was like, this is the last resort, that I have to make this a public issue at this point. It's very much the same thing when people ask me to tweet something on like for them or on their behalf. I am responsible for the network that I've amassed over time, and I'm going to tread carefully on the requests that people get from me. And there are a lot of times when I'm just going to say no. And at the end of the day, becoming comfortable with saying no is one of the most important skills you can build professionally and personally.
Yeah. Yeah, and how people respond to that no really reveals their true character, doesn't it?
Oh yeah.
That's really, really well said. How did you amass this large audience? Was it inviting folks to follow the entrepreneurial journey and build in public? I feel like that would be like I would subscribe to follow the.
I think more of it was just tweeting really dumb developer jokes that people really came onto. Actually, my husband printed signs of some of my more popular tweets that are kind of funny. Like this one is one that I tweeted. Printed?
That is so cool. Yeah. He printed your tweets?
Oh, yes. And they're actually cool. Really funny. So now they're like desk ornaments. So it'll come into focus eventually.
There we go. Roses are red, violets are blue, unexpected curly brace on line 32. That's awesome. In 2016. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. So like these are from quite some time ago. And I will say that once you hit a certain number of followers, people start following you because everybody else follows you. And this is usually around like the 10,000 mark. And so it took me a long time to go from 0 to 5,000 to 10,000, and then from 10,000 to 50,000 in like a year, or less than a year, and from like 50 to 100,000 in less than a year from there too. And it's a combination of, and this is what got really confusing about my identity, by the way, is I had the developer community following me because of these dumb developer tweets. I had the entrepreneurial community following me, the Shopify community following me. And then I started repositioning myself as an engineering leader. And so I had people following me because of that. And so one tweet, and this is one thing that I often talk about, you are not one persona. You're never one persona. Amen. You're never going to resonate with everybody who follows you. And there comes to a point where somebody, take Threads, for example. I'm pretty active on Threads, particularly in the fitness community. I run a lot. I was going to train for the Chicago Marathon. I got injured, so now I'm training for a different marathon next year. And I post on Threads, not tweet. I post on Threads a lot about running. And I remember somebody had replied to one of my posts some time ago being like, this is great, but I really wish you'd post more tech content on here. And I was like, go to Twitter. Different audiences, different people. I have many different personas.
Yeah, I'm actually a multidimensional human being. Imagine that.
Shockingly.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I really appreciate that. Have you ever met like parties? I want to say people because it could also be companies. Like parties who are interested in like leveraging your audience. Hey, like help us sell this thing, or I ask because look, I don't have the audience you have. I'm not sure I want it, frankly. But there was a time where I was invited to a developer barbecue here in Berlin. So it was beautiful weather. You know, a bunch of React developers got together in a park. They were like, "Hey, you live in Berlin, come hang out." And so I did. and it was actually really nice. We had music. It was a great vibe. But at some point, they were like, "Look at this meat! Doesn't this meat look so good?" And I was like, "It looks amazing. It's like rose red, and like, wow, I can't wait to." And do you want to take a picture of it? Yeah, totally. I took a picture of it, and then it's like, "Oh, why don't you tweet that picture?" And I was like, "This is so weird."
That is
it
so uncomfortable.
Yeah, I was very uncomfortable. I was like, actually, yeah, well, I could tweet it, I guess, but like I didn't know that this was like it felt like a premeditated thing. I have to, like, I don't even have that big of an audience. Is this something that you experience or you have experienced?
Oh yeah. I've had various I've had various circumstances. I can name a few that are not necessarily like specifically that. I've had people come up to me at a conference asking why I unfollowed them on Twitter. I've been inside a coffee shop because I love going to coffee shops on like weekend mornings. It's one of my favorite ways to kind of like start off a weekend. And you could tell that somebody in that coffee shop knows who I am from Twitter. But they're not coming up to me, and you can just see out of the corner of your eye somebody's just sitting there going like this and just like constantly staring at you. So at one point I just look at them and I'm just like and just like waved and just like that's it. Those are some really awkward situations. I've definitely had some others where people invite me to things because, again, they want to leverage my audience. They want me to post about it. They want me to boost them or their business, whatever it happens to be. I get a lot of sponsorship requests from people, but they're not really like true sponsorships. They're like, hey, if you post about this, we'll give you 10% off for your own purchase. I'm like, I didn't know you existed 5 seconds before, and I'm sure as hell not going to spend money on this now.
Yeah. Gosh, that must be so difficult. But it's like what I really appreciate, Kelly, like listening to you talk about this is there's just a high degree of I just want to be genuine. That's the big takeaways. I just want to be genuine, and I think this is why you have the following you have, because people like actually respect this. How can you not, right? Versus. I actually have friends who have similar sized audiences who like they have price sheets that they give to. So like in the case of my barbecue, the equivalent would be me saying, "Yeah, sure, I'll post this for like $10,000." And no criticism there. I just think one is more business biased and the other is more I don't care. I'm just a human being biased, Yeah.
I find a balance between the two really. Because there are definitely people who I get lots of people asking me for their feedback on their startup, their product that they're building. And I'm like, great, my consulting rate is $400 an hour. Let me know if you'd like to schedule some time. More than happy to turn that into a like more transactional. You want my time, you want my thoughts. I have very limited time as it stands right now. So you will pay for that time. If you're just asking me to come out to your party or whatever, I hope that you want me there because I'm a halfway decent human and I think I'm decently fun to be around, and that you're not just using me to post about things on social media. I also don't like posting about places I am while I'm there for probably obvious reasons.
Yeah, and if they do want you just there to promote their thing, then they pay for it because then it's like transaction for transaction. That's totally awesome. I'm learning a lot here because I think as if I end up growing, there's a way to deal with this, right? Like it can't be you turn a human being into a transaction, but if you want to be transactional about it, we can talk money. I think that's such a great takeaway. I personally intend to use this. I want to let's start like wrapping up, but I want to talk to you about one thing you mentioned that I think a lot of folks maybe won't get the chance to talk to you about, but want to hear from you about, which is you mentioned you're an actual licensed therapist. That is so cool. I have to ask, is there overlap here as an engineering leader? Like you've got to work with people and get the best out of them. And sometimes people have a hard time showing up on the team to like at their full capacity. What's the overlap look like there? Do you find yourself using the therapy skills in the workplace quite often?
Yeah. So one quick correction. I'm not a licensed therapist. I'm a trained therapist, mostly because I'm not going to pay for licensure when I'm not actually like sitting asking you how this makes you feel. There is ton of crossover with leadership. When it really comes down to it, there are a few things where it really shines. One, establishing rapport. I get a really good read on people in an interview early on. I'm able to connect with them early on and really get to see who they truly are. They feel comfortable talking to me, opening up to me, and it also will often identify some very glaring red flags because they're so comfortable talking with me in an interview. I've had some very, very weird interviews. We're not going to unpack that one. The other side of this is building trust with your team. My team knows that they can come to me for not just professional issues, but personal issues as well. I never force them to talk about anything, but I know some very personal details about my team, and I am somebody that they can talk to about this. And then I of course bring it back to the business of like, okay, so here's how it impacts the business. And here's how, at the end of the day, I'm responsible for making sure the business is there, but I'm also responsible for the well-being of my team. And so having that strong level of trust with the team has also been really helpful there. Third thing, conflict resolution. Obviously, no matter where you are in your life, whether it's personal or professional, you're dealing with conflict. And conflict is not necessarily an argument. It could very much just be like, hey, we're not in agreement on which, as you said, like database structure to use. Like we're not in agreement on how to proceed on this particular project. And being able to help them break down that communication and say, let's talk through this. Let's figure out how to actually navigate this particular thing. It really does help. And the last thing I will say is I make decisions very quickly based on behaviors. I know humans are going to human, and we all mess up at times, and we're going to talk about that. And I'm not afraid to have those conversations. Like I will sit down and talk to you and be like, hey, this behavior, like this is what's impacting this behavior, and here's what needs to change, and here's how I'm going to work with you to change this behavior. Like let me help me help you. We'll talk through like how to communicate with this particular thing. I have a very geographically distributed team from California to India. That means that I'm working with very different personalities, very different cultures, very different ways of thinking, ways of working, and so on. And so you have to change the way you communicate with people as a result. And so I'm able to like really pull in all these things from my practice of, learning to be a therapist and applying that to leadership 100%.
Interesting. How do you feel about like mixing context? What I mean by this is, not recently, I guess it's been a while now, but the people behind like 37.6, like DHH and that crew, had this rule at their company where they don't allow people to talk about politics at work, which was highly controversial.
That was
right?
very controversial.
And I'm not saying, and I'm not saying I agree with this or disagree with this, but I want to, as an engineering leader, I want to get your take, because you mentioned, I'm not necessarily on that issue, but you mentioned that sometimes people talk to you about very personal things as the manager or the director. How do you feel about boundaries about this kind of thing? Like, should they, like, is it ideal to do that, to bring personal stuff to work, or is it better to like pursue being fully context appropriate? Meaning, this is my work self. I show up here. I'm here to do a job. I leave my personal stuff at the door. I've heard mixed input from different leaders here. I'm curious what your take is.
Yeah. The reason you're going to hear mixed input is because it depends on the leader. 100%. What are they comfortable with, and how do they kind of approach this? You can never disassociate your personal life from your professional life, just like you can never really separate politics from work. Work in life is inherently political. Everything that we do is political. Everything that we are consciously deciding and unconsciously or subconsciously deciding is all grounded in politics. And so as a result, you're going to get very different ways of thinking and very different ways of approaching these kinds of issues. So for me, I don't mind having these conversations at on a more personal level with my team and with others at the company, because they know that they can trust me, and I am choosing to carry that burden. That is something that I am choosing to help them through. And there is a line. And there, even I, who am more than happy to have these conversations with people, I will tell them like, hey, this is getting too like I really appreciate you opening up to me, but there's some things I just don't want to know. And that is something that I think is a completely respectful way of approaching, like, you have these boundaries. It is up to the leader to determine what those boundaries, like where those boundaries lie. But it's also really, really important at the leadership level, not just you as an individual leader, but your entire organization, how you approach the culture within your organization, to really define what this means and what you're going to accept and what you're not going to accept within an organization. I think that the no politics at work whatsoever is the far, far end of the spectrum. And there's plenty of space in between where you can have political conversations, again, because you cannot really separate politics from work without crossing that line and making people feel uncomfortable.
Right. I appreciate that. About boundaries still, do you find that your team, so this next question is around about, because you mentioned there are boundaries. It's not like just because people bring personal stuff to these conversations that there's just no boundaries. It's just the boundary moves based on the leader. I love that.
Yeah.
Let's switch the role of boundaries here and talk about the boundaries of the reports. And the reason I want to ask this question is because I've spoken to so many people, Kelly, so many engineers, DevRel professionals who have managers who they report to. So this is not the leaders, but this is the reports. Yeah. They really struggle with boundaries, more so in the United States, more so in the Western side of the United States, because of this culture of like, let's ship, let's do it, let's go, and I think that's actually really, it can be nice. So I'm reminded of this scene from Deadpool and Wolverine, which I watched recently, where Deadpool, like in the movie, he says this thing where he was like, look at Denmark. They'll never put a person on the moon, but man, they're so happy, And I think the United States is sort of the opposite of this. Like, you work very hard, you put people on the moon, but there's this like grind, like I'm going to go hard. People are literally sleeping in pods in San Francisco. And a consequence of this culture is that people tend to relax their boundaries between work and actually like quality of life, and will tend to work, 60-hour weeks, 70-hour weeks, just go really hard. And what I find with reports is they really, really struggle with having these boundaries of like, look, I'm not going to do any more work here. And so then the burden is on the leader to say, look, we do a 40-hour week here, or something like that. Like, you need balance, right? And your background in therapy should ideally help with that. But I guess the big question here is, have you experienced this as an engineering leader where your reports are just really struggling with boundaries? And for the listeners who are in a similar boat, like, what's your best advice to them to establish and maintain those boundaries?
Yeah. I mean, I hope for those who are struggling with boundaries that they have somebody who they can talk to about it. Because that is the first thing you have to, like, I won't know necessarily that you're having an issue with keeping these boundaries and making sure you're taking care of yourself and keeping that balance, unless I am seeing that, like, if you're opening a pull request at 3 a.m., obviously I can see that you're working weird hours. And, there are times to push, especially in a startup. There are going to be times when you do have longer weeks. You're going to push a little bit more, but it shouldn't be the norm. And I've noticed with some people that, especially on my team, again, I'm more in tune with it than I think, most people are because, again, background in therapy. But, as a leader, I would watch your team. Like, how many days are they actually taking off? Like, are they using their vacation time? If you have flexible time off, like unlimited vacation, are they actually using it? This is going to have to be a culture change at the organizational level. Then we all know that there are certain companies that offer unlimited time off with the expectation that you're just not going to take it. And then there are other companies that say, we're going to give you flexible time off because we believe that you should be, in control of your break time. But we're also going to expect you to take, at least 1 week a quarter, and you're going to have additional time off in between that. That's how I operate. That's how we operate at Spot. Like, it is flexible. But, when it comes to like being the individual contributor or just the individual who is having trouble setting those boundaries, you have to speak up. And I know that is a really uncomfortable thing. I had a situation with my boss last year, I want to say, where was it last year? It doesn't matter. Where they called or they texted me on a Friday night or messaged me on a Friday night saying like, oh, this is something super broken. Like, we need to fix it. And so I'm out at a brewery with some friends and I'm like, oh, wow, this was obviously very important. Let me go ahead and step away and call them. And on this phone call, they were like, oh, well, we can take a look at this on Monday. And I'm like, so it wasn't actually that urgent, but it came across as urgent. And so that was feedback that I provided to this individual. And it's like, hey, if it's not urgent, tell me it's not urgent, because I am that person who, while I reinforce boundaries for my team, I am bad at setting my own boundaries. I'm bad at respecting my own boundaries. And I know this about myself. And so I'm going to say, again, like, help me help you. I'm going to tell my manager, be like, hey, I'm going to struggle with this. If you tell me something's urgent, I'm going to drop everything and jump on it. I really, what I need you to say is upfront, this is an issue, but let's talk about it on Monday. And I'm okay with that. So that's kind of what I mean. Like, figure out where your boundaries lie, and then you have to work with those within your organization to actually help you enforce those boundaries. It's not only going to come from you, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. What I'm hearing is also like for the leadership specifically, a takeaway is to normalize the boundaries, is to like proactively. I like what you said, like when you see people open up a pull request at 3 a.m. going like, hey, like, are you working odd hours? You haven't taken any. So to start that conversation and make it
Yeah.
super normalized to like, where are you? To even have that conversation in one-on-ones, like, where are your boundaries?
Yep.
And I think when you do that, people just get comfortable. Oh, okay, this means I get to have boundaries, and they do. I think that's. But again, I think this can weigh especially heavy on the early career engineers, right? Who
Yeah.
they feel this pressure of like, I want to prove myself, and also they don't know. Like for example, I've been coding for long and I've been working in tech for long enough where I just know to go to my manager or coach and be like, I need a week off. I can't do this anymore.
Yep.
But this is something that you learn with time. I think a lot of the early career folks just don't know. And so, no, I can do it. I can do it until they get sick or burn out. And then
Yep.
you have a bigger fire in your hand. So I guess it would be the responsibility of the manager to work with them to dial that in as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. People early in their career are naturally more inclined to push again to prove themselves, but they're also just hungry. They're excited. They're in this new career. They're very excited about what they're working on. They want to work on it all the time. And to a level that is great. We love ambition. We love seeing that push. But again, you and I speak from experience where we know there's a limit. Everyone has a limit. That limit is also going to change based on where you're at in your life. You know, if I were a young 24-year-old who is early in my career at a startup, I'm probably going to have a lot more time to dedicate towards work and want to dedicate towards work because I have fewer responsibilities. You know, I don't have kids, but I do have a family. I do have social life, and I respect the time off. I love traveling, and that now that I can actually afford to travel as opposed to when I was in college, I'm going to prioritize that. And so your priorities shift over time, and so your boundaries are also going to shift over time.
Yeah. I like that you can also now travel with actual PTO because you're no longer an entrepreneur. This must be like a huge game changer for you.
That was one of the hardest things. And speaking of boundaries as a freelancer, when you're billing hourly, when you're not working, you're not making money. And that is why I strongly encourage people who are in like the service side of business to productize whatever you can.
Yeah, that really messed with my head. I was no fun on vacations when I ran my German consultancy. It was the worst. Like I was in Bali on the beach in a 5-star villa, completely absent from the whole experience because I was like, okay, but like I'm on the clock. Can you imagine? So it was basically just wasted. And this is the curse of no boundaries when you're a freelancer. So I appreciate the discussion here. All right, I want to ask you a very big question, and this may, depending on how it goes, be the last question. But this is a question I've been asking every entrepreneur in the podcast. We're currently in the season of talking to founders, CEOs, and entrepreneurs, and you've been all of those. And it comes out of a somewhat dark discussion I had with some entrepreneurial friends some time ago, where, you know, if you've watched the first Avengers movie, in the post-credit scene, they're all sitting and eating shawarma because they're just completely destroyed. This is the setting where this discussion I'm about to describe happened. We were all just kind of deflated, and some of the entrepreneurial folks were like, no one prepares you for this. That's what they were like, this is just like, it's so unexpected. Like nobody told me it was going to be like this. And I said, that's interesting. We as engineers work with things that are living standards, like specifications. Like HTML is just a big 25 megabyte specification of this element does this and that element does that. JavaScript is just a language specification document and so on, right? I was thinking, what if for the entrepreneur, there was such a document, a living specification for these are the things you can expect. This is how it's going to go. These are the skills you need to have, and so on. If there was such a document, and I know everyone's experience is super different, but I have to believe that if you zoom out broadly enough, things start to converge. And so if there was such a document, what would you add to it that other entrepreneurs would maybe miss and would benefit from knowing?
I think I would talk about the loneliness that comes with being an entrepreneur. You know, when you're at a company, when you're working at a company, you have coworkers, you have colleagues, you have people you can commiserate with. through the tough times. You have people you can celebrate with through the good times. When you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a freelancer or you have a team, your responsibility is the business. It is, if you have a team, your responsibility is to make sure your team is taken care of. You can be friendly with them, but you're not friends with them. And it can be very lonely to go through some of those hard times where your team is not really going to understand just how difficult it is. I mean, take, for example, me shutting down my agency. I had some very less than ideal messages come through with a couple of my employees when I was winding down the agency, because they saw it as I'm abandoning them, that I am giving up, that I should have communicated better with them. And there was so much that was going on behind the scenes that I could not share with them. I didn't outright say, hey, I have $200,000 in debt because I've been trying to make your payroll. Like, what are they going to do with that information? They're going to say, like, what do you want me to say to that? Now I feel like a burden to you. You know, there's no good conversation that can come from that. And so that's what I really mean. Like, through the hard times as an entrepreneur, like, it can be extremely lonely. And one of my best recommendations is to find other entrepreneurs to talk to. And again, it's your network. It is those relationships you build of other people who are going through the thick of it at the same time, that you really need to connect with others who truly understand you. I had a therapist at this time. I specifically sought out a therapist who was an entrepreneur who moved into therapy afterwards, because they knew exactly what I had been through, and they were going to be able to help me so much more than a therapist who has only ever worked, a traditional therapy job, for example, or, even if they're a second career therapist, like it's still not the same. So I definitely say, like, loneliness is number one. The second one I'll just call out here is normalizing failure. We all know, like, we've seen all the statistics around, like, a vast majority, 90% plus of startups fail, especially in their first year. And we're like, yes, we know this can happen, but it's not going to happen to me. Like, I'm different. I'm special. My business is special. I truly believe in what I'm building. I know it's going to work out in the end, until it doesn't. We have plenty of companies. Obviously, we see the success stories. We see these success stories all the time. We just focus in so hard on these success stories. There was a time about a year and a half ago where I wanted to write another book, just interviewing founders who failed. I wanted to share their story of failure, because I knew that my story of failure would resonate with others in the same space. I have had so many people who are in the agency space in particular, who have followed my journey for a long time, reach out to me in the past year being like, I am considering shutting down my agency. I'm considering transitioning away from this, and I'm really struggling with it. Can we talk? And I will 100% jump on that call immediately, because I know exactly the pain that they're feeling. So loneliness and failure, like, you have to normalize that failure, but have your people who really understand what you're going through.
Yeah, it sounds like they're really two sides of the same coin, because the failure, what compounds the sense of dread with that failure is probably the sense of loneliness, right? It makes it worse because you feel like you're failing alone. And so if you can have someone to quell that, it's key. This reminds me of the work that my friend Jordan is doing. Jordan's a partner at an investment firm called BetaWorks. And they invest in, like, a bunch of AI startups. I think they invested in Stable Diffusion and other things. But anyway, they what Jordan's doing is trying to form some type of, like, community for their portfolio founders because of this exact reason, because it's so lonely. Yeah. And so, I think that's thank you. That's such a idea that needs repeating. Also, I think we need to you mentioned normalizing failure. What would you say to reconsidering failure? Because, like you mentioned earlier, yes, you shut down your agency and it was difficult and was the darkest time, but it was necessary to lead you to thrive here at Spot, right? So our failures gifts. Like there's a great line from a song that I really like called Blessings by Ty Dolla Sign, where he says, if I ever took a loss, I learned a lesson. And so, every loss is a lesson. I like that. Yeah, do you think there's something there around even reconsidering failure itself? So yes, normalizing the fact that no, this will going from this is never going to happen to me because I'm special to like this will probably happen to me, but also then saying this will probably happen to me and this is going to be for my good.
I would approach it differently. I would say, instead of saying this will never happen to me, I would say there's a possibility that this could happen to me. You don't want to go in saying this will happen to me, because then you're kind of setting yourself up. You're, that self-fulfilling prophecy of I'm going to fail. So instead, phrase it as, hey, I could fail. And if I fail, here's what this means. Here's what this will do to me. Here's how I'll feel about it. Here's what I'll do about it. The reality is, again, you cannot plan for everything that comes your way. And if you fail, I can say, here's my book on if I were to start over again, here's how I'm going to approach failure this time. And I will end up ripping that page out of the book and say, none of this is real. Like, none of this is actually reality. It's so specific to your particular experience at that given time, that failure is, that the best you can do is acknowledge it. You can sit with it and you can figure out how to move on from it and just really leverage the people that you have around you. But I think acknowledging that you could fail is a perfectly healthy approach to this. You don't want to say you will fail, and you don't want to say you'll never fail.
Yeah, that is so good. I will say this, like when I started my consultancy, I was very scared because I've been an immigrant my entire life. And I was like, I've never been without a full-time job because I needed that visa to be in a country. And I was like, and so it was the first time I got to experience what most citizens get to experience, which is I'm just going to quit my job and I don't know what's next. I might start something. And so I did that, but it was one of the scariest things ever because for the beginning, there was like no money coming in at all. And I've never experienced that. And I was like, what to do? And the reason I continued was because you said earlier in our discussion, you said relationships are everything. My wife talked me into it. And she said, look, man, since I've known you the past, I don't know, like 5 years, like you've gone from success to success. You will never, she didn't say you'll never fail, but she's like, your trend has been upward. And I was wrestling with questions of, but what if I fail? Yep. And so for me, it's always been like, what if I fail? What if this goes nowhere? What if we have no income? And I mean, you just barely finished being a student. So what if we really what if we have to give up our home and live on the street? And, I was going there. I tend to catastrophize a lot. And she was like, dude, my mom lives in a mansion. That's literally what she said. She was like worst case, we're not going to be living on the street. We just go move in with my mom. And she lives alone. So she would welcome like voices in the house. Yeah. And so she was like, no, when you fail, like what's going to happen to me, like you said earlier, what's going to happen to us is it will be positive. So she's like, go for it. Let's see what happens. And indeed, it was very like financially successful. It was just a lot of the bureaucracy sort of bogged me down. Yeah. But I think there was also I apologize if I'm going a bit long here, but there was a discussion, there was an article that I found that searched for common trends among the world's greatest entrepreneurs, and they measured greatest as like these people invented things like the iPhone and created entire industries, right? So they looked at common traits between these folks, and they found that every entrepreneur had this one thing in common. Sounds like clickbait, which is they had the sense of if I fail and when I fail, I'm going to be fine. Like, it's not going to destroy me. That was the like unifying tenet between all these folks. And I thought that was also very interesting. All that to say, your point about normalizing failure lands very well. And I think that's a concrete takeaway for everybody. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a good way to end this. Yeah. Well, listen, Kelly, it's been an absolute pleasure. I don't take it lightly. I know you're busy being director of engineering and looking after the video intelligence service and also managing your enormous following. So thank you for all of the insights you shared, walking your career timeline and also all the insights we could extract from being an entrepreneur, pivoting from being an entrepreneur, and the insights you had towards the end. On behalf of myself and all the listeners, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this with us. I really appreciate it. This is a really good time. Really good chat. Thank you for joining my discussion with Kelly Vaughn. I hope you found it useful, and I hope you feel inspired and have some actual practical takeaways that you can use, whether you're switching from an entrepreneur to an employee or vice versa. I hope you also, if you're in the process of reinventing yourself, have some of her great takeaways as one of the greatest engineering leaders of our time. If you're learning from and or enjoying this content, then a great way to support the podcast is to like the video on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. If you're listening on Apple and or Spotify, I don't know why it would be and either way. If you're listening on either of these platforms, then if you could leave a review up to 5 stars, that'd be super helpful. Of course, the whole point is to make this information discoverable to as many people as possible. So if you want to share this episode on social media, that'd be huge, actually. In any case, I want to thank you for being a part of this podcast. Thank you for sticking around. And most importantly, thank you for your interest in engineering.